What would happen if China and the Philippines, two nations separated by a narrow sea, actually went to war? It's a scenario many hope never comes to pass, but the tensions in the South China Sea make it a question worth exploring. Let's break down this complex hypothetical, from the first shot to the global fallout. The trigger would likely be an escalation in the West Philippine Sea. Imagine a confrontation over a disputed reef like Angan Shoal, where the BRP Sierra Madre stands as a lonely outpost. A miscalculation, a collision that turns deadly, or a deliberate act of aggression could light the fuse. The initial hours would be a whirlwind of confusion, diplomatic panic, and military alerts. China's military, the People's Liberation Army, is one of the largest and most technologically advanced in the world. Their initial strategy would probably focus on achieving sea and air supremacy quickly. We're talking about a potential barrage of missiles aimed at key Philippine military assets, naval bases in Subic and Cavite, airfields like Clark and Basa, and critical command and control centers. The goal would be to neutralize the Philippines' ability to fight back before it can even fully mobilize. The Philippine military, while smaller and less technologically advanced, would not be a pushover. They have the home field advantage and a deep-seated determination to defend their sovereignty. Their strategy would be one of asymmetric warfare. Instead of meeting China's navy head-on in open water, they would likely use smaller, faster vessels, anti-ship missiles hidden along their extensive coastline, and potentially submarine assets to conduct hit-and-run attacks. They would aim to make the cost of invasion so high that China would have to reconsider. The archipelago's thousands of islands provide a natural fortress, making a full-scale occupation incredibly difficult and costly for any invading force. But this conflict wouldn't happen in a vacuum. The world would be watching, and the most important player to watch would be the United States. The Philippines and the U.S. have a mutual defense treaty, signed in 1951. Article 4 of that treaty states that an armed attack in the Pacific area on either of the parties would be dangerous to its own peace and safety and that each party would act to meet the common dangers. So, would the U.S. intervene? The activation of this treaty is the billion-dollar question. An attack on a Philippine public vessel, aircraft, or armed forces in the South China Sea could trigger it. Washington would face immense pressure to honor its commitment. A failure to do so would shatter its credibility with allies across the globe, from Japan and South Korea to Australia and NATO members. The message would be clear: American security guarantees are not reliable. If the U.S. decides to intervene, the conflict escalates dramatically. We could see U.S. carrier strike groups moving into the region, challenging China's control of the seas. U.S. air power from bases in Japan, Guam, and potentially even the Philippines itself would come into play. This raises the terrifying prospect of a direct military confrontation between two nuclear-armed superpowers. The risk of miscalculation and escalation to a wider, even global, conflict would be immense. Other nations would be forced to pick sides or attempt a fraught neutrality. Japan, with its own territorial disputes with China and a strong alliance with the U.S., would likely provide logistical support and might even get directly involved if its own security is threatened. Australia, another key U.S. ally, would also be under pressure to contribute. European nations would likely condemn the aggression and impose severe economic sanctions on China, but their appetite for direct military involvement would be limited. Meanwhile, ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, would be fractured. Some member states, with their own claims in the South China Sea, like Vietnam, might quietly support the Philippines. Others, with deep economic ties to China, like Cambodia and Laos, might lean towards Beijing or call for a de-escalation that favors the larger power. The bloc's principle of consensus would be shattered, rendering it largely ineffective in resolving the crisis. The economic consequences would be immediate and catastrophic. The South China Sea is one of the world's most important shipping lanes. Over $3 trillion in trade passes through it annually. A war would shut this vital artery down. Supply chains would be completely severed. Everything from the smartphone you use to the clothes you wear would be affected. Global shipping would have to be rerouted, causing massive delays and skyrocketing costs. Energy prices would soar. Much of the oil and natural gas that powers East Asia's economies travels through this waterway. A blockade or active conflict would create an energy crisis in Japan, South Korea, and even China itself. Stock markets around the world would plummet as investors panic. We would be looking at a global recession far deeper and more severe than anything we've seen in recent memory. For the people of the Philippines, the cost would be immeasurable. Cities could become battlegrounds, civilian casualties would be unavoidable. Millions could be displaced, creating a massive humanitarian crisis. The country's economy, heavily reliant on trade, tourism, and remittances from overseas workers, would collapse. Overseas Filipino workers around the world would watch in horror, their families in danger and their ability to send support home cut off. Even for China, a military victory might lead to a strategic disaster. While they might achieve their initial military objectives, they would face global isolation and crippling economic sanctions. The international backlash would be immense. Their global standing, cultivated over decades, would be destroyed overnight. Occupying an archipelago of over 100 million people who are fiercely opposed to their presence would be a quagmire, a long, bloody, and unwinnable insurgency that would drain their resources and manpower for years to come. In the long term, a war would fundamentally reshape the world order. It would solidify a new Cold War, this time between a US-led bloc and a China-Russia axis. Global institutions like the United Nations would be paralyzed. The world would become a more dangerous and less prosperous place for everyone. This isn't a movie plot. It's a real, albeit worst case, scenario that policymakers are trying to prevent. The web of alliances, the economic interdependence, and the sheer destructive power of modern militaries all serve as powerful deterrents. But history shows us that deterrence can fail. The path forward lies in de-escalation, diplomacy, and a commitment to international law, like the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. Finding a peaceful resolution to the disputes in the South China Sea is not just a regional issue. It's a global imperative. The stakes are simply too high for all of us. This hypothetical war has no true winners, only varying degrees of loss and devastation that would be felt for generations. Thank you for watching. If you found this analysis interesting, please like this video, subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into complex topics, and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. Stay curious and stay informed.